One day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on you will fish for people." So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him. And verses 27 to 32. After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. "Follow me," Jesus said to him. And Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. Then Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with them. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, who belonged to their sect, complained to his disciples, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus answered them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." May God bless this reading from his word.
Well, this morning we are at the end of this series, and for the last 4 weeks we've been talking about just taking a walk across the room. It's been a short journey of 4 weeks where we've been trying to explore how we can share the reality of a God who loves us, who cares for us, and who has incredible plans for every person. And so we started with this very simple approach, just learning to walk across the room. And as we do that, what we are looking at is, how do we develop relationships with people? So we all have to take some kind of a walk across the room if we're going to actually do that. Then we thought about, how do I develop friendships? How do I discover people's story? And what can we discern about the next steps that God is calling us to actually take? Then last week we talked about, how do I start to share God's story? And then God has a story, but he has a story that relates to our lives. And we need to learn how to make the bridge between where we are and where God wants us to be in terms of a relationship with himself. And I want to say thank you to those who sent in their stories. Some were 100 words, some were about 1,000 words, but that was okay. They were amazing stories to read of the before and after. What was life like before you discovered this relationship with God? And what are some of the things that have been happening afterwards? We said, as you share your story, the words need to be very kind. The words need to be very interesting. But above all, the words need to be spoken with a very humble spirit. Now the question is, how does this become a passion in our life? How do we take the opportunity to build relationships with people so that we can share with them the story of God's amazing grace and love? So I was thinking about this, and I know that many of you, as it gets colder, are thinking, how do we move to a warmer environment? And a lot of us would probably love to spend part of this winter in the Caribbean. Now, if you've gone to the Caribbean, you notice that the water is a beautiful color. Let's just find out, have any of you ever gone snorkeling? Oh, quite a few of you have. So you know what it's like. Have any of you ever gone scuba diving? They're the more adventuresome ones. But it's amazing when you go into the Caribbean and you start to snorkel out around the reef. You put your mask in the water and you start to look down and you see life like you have never seen before. On top of the water, everything looks blue and usually very tranquil. But then when you put on this snorkel and this diving mask and you start to look down, you begin to see fish of all shapes and sizes and a lot of different color. What you notice is there is a lot of activity that's going on underneath the water. What you are doing is seeing life from a really different perspective. And that's what I think we need to understand, that as we engage in people's lives, there's a lot more going on than what we know on the surface. And as people start to share their story, you begin to realize all that is actually taking place in their life. You know, when people come up to us and they say, "So how you doing?" we automatically say, "Fine, I'm okay," even if our world could be falling apart. But somehow we wonder, would people even be interested in knowing my story? I remember this from grade 13, when they had grade 13, back in Noah's day. When I was graduating from grade 13, I was walking across the platform to receive my diploma. And I had a math teacher who was always doing something a little different. And you know, when people would say, "Congratulations, congratulations," she said to me on the way across, "Do you like peanut butter?" And I thought, why is she asking me that? But she just wanted to do something different to see if anybody took note of what was being said. And so very often, people have a wonderful smile on their face, but there could be all kinds of things going on under the surface of their life. And so that's what I hope we will discover this morning, that we need to have a greater vision than just what we see on the surface, but to be aware that there are many things happening in people's lives underneath the surface. So we're going to start with a story about fish, which kind of fits with snorkeling and scuba diving or whatever else we're going to do. So in the gospel reading this morning, Jesus was teaching a crowd of people. And while he's there, he notices that there are two boats, fishing boats. They're not big. I mean, it's only the Sea of Galilee, and it's not a huge, it's like a lake. But that's where they were. And he notices that one of them belongs, at least one of them, to a man called Simon Peter. And he says to Simon, "Simon, can we use your boat?" And he wants to put out into the water. And they didn't have amplification systems, so I believe Jesus knew that sound carries well over water. So he's out on the water a little bit, and the crowd is back here on the shore, and he can speak to them as he is in this boat. So when he finishes his teaching, he says to them, "Put your boat out a little further into deeper water, and put your net in, and you can catch some fish." And the reply was rather interesting. Now remember this, Jesus was a carpenter. Peter was the fisherman. So a carpenter is asking a fisherman to do something in fishing that he thinks has never been done before, or just doesn't make sense. Those of you who are fishermen, or fisherwomen, or fisher persons, whatever is the politically correct statement, you will know that in the brightness of the daylight, you don't catch fish as easily or readily as in the early morning or later in the day. Peter says, "Jesus, we've been fishing all night, and we've had no luck." Implying, why are we going to do it now? But then he says, "Because it is you, I will do exactly what you have said." And he puts his net over the side of the boat, and he catches the mother lode. What happened was, there were so many fish that he had to call to his partners, James and John, and said, "Bring your boat out as well." And they filled both boats to the very top of the gunwales. This was incredible. It was the catch of all catches. They were pretty excited. We've never had anything like this happen before. And in the midst of all of that excitement, Jesus said to them something that was quite different. He said, I'm going to give you something different in life to do. Instead of just fishing for fish, I'm going to invite you to join me on this incredible adventure that you and I together will be involved as we become fishers of men and women. And if you come and join me, you are going to see the real reason for living and what can get you excited about life and things which will have an eternal consequence. And that's the same invitation that Jesus has been giving to people over and over again. Come, he says, and you will catch people. Come. And you're going to be engaged in a ministry of touching people's lives. And this will be the greater vision of life. So I don't know about you, but perhaps this is where we need to begin. Is this the vision of life that really can be a driving force of our life? And over the years, Jesus has been asking all sorts of people to come and join him. Business people, stay-at-home moms and dads, bus drivers, teachers and students, athletes or actors, singers, political leaders, retail salespeople, lawyers, engineers, even people like you and me. You and me. So the question is, are we going to throw our life into the greater vision that God has intended for his people? And if we do, there are a couple things we need to be aware of. And the first thing to be aware of is this, that God's priority in life is always about people. So people are important to God. And that's what Jesus was trying to say to these three fishermen, Simon, James, and John. And that's what he's trying to say to each one of us here this morning. I want you to understand, says Jesus, that life is really about people. And in God's greater vision, people are the ultimate priority. So it's going to involve caring for people. It's a radical inclusiveness of other people, regardless of how they look, of how they talk, or even if they act differently than we do. And so this is what Jesus said. He said, "Let your light shine before others in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." So Jesus is saying, live your life in such a way that people will be able to see God and bring honor and glory to him. What he's also saying, in such a way, must imply that there could be more than one way. We can choose how our light will impact people. So I think there are two options. Our life or our light can either point people to the Father, or we just keep the light turned on us. And we're saying, just look at me. There's a video that I found very helpful. And I want to be able to share this with you. It's just very short. But think about the truth that you will see in this little presentation.
In the beginning, darkness covered the earth. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. The true light, which gives light to everyone, came into the world. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it. It is a light for the lost, the searching and the seeking. A light for the darkest valley. A light to drive out fear. even in the shadow of death. When we believe in the light, we become children of the light. It shines in us, through us. If we walk in the light, if we let it shine before others, we become a city on a hill, the light of the world. When we let His word light our path, others will follow. We become a beacon of hope to a world in darkness. Our lives reflect the glory of His resurrection. He makes us a light for the nations, so His salvation may reach to the end of the earth. Let there be light. For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light.
So Jesus said, make your light shine in such a way that people will come and know the Father. And they will come to know the Father by the way that you treat them, by how you respond to what people are actually saying, by the way in which you embrace them, and the way in which you make them a priority in your life. Jesus is telling us the stakes are far too high. We need to be able to draw people to God and never deter them from coming to Him. It's interesting that sometimes people thought in Jesus' day that children were not important, just because they're tiny and short. And they were trying to bring children to Jesus, and the disciples said, oh, they're not big enough and they're not that significant at this stage of life. And Jesus said, no, let the children come to me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. He is always saying that people are a priority in the heart of God. So the question is, whose light is to shine? And the Bible seems to teach us very clearly, the light that is to shine is your light and my light. And that will happen if we start to build a lifestyle around accepting people and caring for people and befriending people and exposing them to the reality of God's amazing love and grace. So people are always a priority. Here's the question. Does your light point people to the Father? Or are you just focused on yourself? The second thing we need to understand is that we focus on the potential of people. When Jesus told these fishermen, He said, cast out your net on the other side of the boat into the deep water. Let's face it, they weren't too eager at the beginning to actually do that. See, they were the experts. They knew everything about fishing. What does this carpenter know about fishing? He should stick to making doors and tables and chairs or whatever else he builds. What does Jesus know about this? But you see, Jesus is able to look past all of what we see that appears on the surface because He sees potential. He sees the potential in every one of our lives here this morning. And sometimes when we look at other people, we don't see much potential. And we have what I would call a little write-off book. In fact, there are probably people in our life that we have actually written off. We don't see much potential. I was thinking about this the other day, and I came across several different individuals, and initially people thought they had no potential. There was Henry Ford, who in the early days, his business failed and he went bust financially 5 times before he ultimately developed the Ford Automobile Company. Albert Einstein, who most of us would consider to be a genius, yet did you know that he never spoke until he was 4 years old? He couldn't read a word on a page until he was 7. He was actually expelled from school because of his inadequacies. And yet we know that this man changed the whole face of modern-day physics. Thomas Edison was told by his teachers, "You're too dumb to learn anything." That's really affirming, isn't it? That's really seeing potential and possibilities. But more than that, he was fired from his first 2 jobs. But we know that he went on to become the great inventor. And the story is told that it took him 1,000 tries before he invented the light bulb. And after 999 failures, he said, well, at least I know 999 ways that you don't make it. And he went on to be an amazing inventor. You remember the cartoonist Charles Schulz? He passed away a few years ago. He was the guy who developed the famous cartoon called Peanuts. His cartoons were rejected from the high school yearbook. He applied to work for Walt Disney as a cartoonist, and they said, you're no good. But his cartoons have been syndicated for years. And there's a guy whose name is Stan Smith. I'm not a tennis player, but some of you might recognize him. Initially, he wanted to be a ball boy at the Davis Cup. And they said, you can't retrieve the balls because you're too clumsy and you're uncoordinated. But he went on to win Wimbledon, the U.S. Open, and the Davis Cup 8 times. People were willing to write them off. And God says, I see potential in every single person. And so there are times that God is going to have to refine the attitude that we actually have towards people. We all need a bit of reshaping, and we know that more than anyone else. But it's amazing that God sees the potential in every single person's life. And Jesus is always doing that. He's bringing about a radical transformation in people that lots would write off. And so the second reading this morning in the continuation of the gospel was this man called Levi, who is also known as Matthew, who became a disciple of Jesus. And we know that Matthew was a tax collector, not a very likely person to be involved in the kingdom of heaven. But we know that one day Jesus said to him, follow me. And look what he does. He gets up, leaves everything, and follows Jesus. Why would he do that? Is this guy Matthew out of his mind? You see, Matthew is about to discover what Jesus already knew. That when you choose the greater vision over the lesser visions of life, it leads to a wealth that nothing and no one else can compare to. Now, Matthew was virtually a wealthy man because he made money collecting taxes. CRA is not poor. But he did it dishonestly. And he could gather however much he thought he could. And he had Roman soldiers who would help him collect the money. All he had to do was pay a portion of that to Rome. And the rest he could put in his pocket. Jesus says, come and follow me. Why would he do it? What would following Jesus mean? Meaning he'd have to leave his business. He'd have to leave his comfortable routine that he already knew. And he would certainly have to leave the financial security that he had already attained. What is Jesus asking him to do? He's asking him to come and follow him and to care for and to prioritize people in a way that he had never done before, because previously he had just swindled people. You see, his life was transformed because Jesus saw the potential in a life that sold out to God. There is amazing potential when your life is sold out to God. So if I was to say one thing this morning, it is just this very simple exhortation. Start small, but start. I don't know where you are in your own journey, and I don't know what God is calling you to do particularly, but I do know He's inviting you, as He's inviting me, to let our light so shine before people that they will see our good works and give honor and glory to God. You might feel a little bit like Matthew, and you want to be part of God's greater vision. But I'm just not sure what to do. If you look at Matthew, he started where he was. Now remember this, he is a recent follower of Jesus. He has not been to a theological college or seminary. He has not taken a lot of training in biblical studies. He is not an orator. He is not a professional counselor. He is just a recent follower of Jesus. But he said, I have this desire in my heart to share with my friends the acceptance and the love and the purpose that you can find in Jesus, because that's what I have found. So he had no training. but there was a tug at his heart. So what is he going to do? He takes a walk across the room. You see, the one thing he knew he could do was throw a party. And that's exactly what he does. He invites all of his old friends, tax collectors. He puts them in a room with other friends who are tax collectors. And these people have also become Christ's followers. And he just wants to see, is when he brings some of his friends together, will it rub off on them as well? I think it would be really interesting to know the conversation that went on at that dinner party. And regardless of what took place, seeds were planted in the hearts and minds of people. He could have stayed with his new friends, but he chose to prioritize people who were outside of the family of God that needed to discover the friendship and acceptance and the grace of God. You see, for all of us, the comfort zone is amongst people who are like us. And we talked about moving out of the comfort zone into the zone of the unknown. And that's exactly what Matthew did. He moved into the zone of the unknown because he had this tug at his heart that his friends that he had connected with needed to hear the same amazing message of God's acceptance and grace and love. He saw possibilities for their lives, even as he had experienced it in his life. God saved him for a purpose, and God has saved each of us for a purpose. And the purpose is to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. When you get to the end of your life, what would you like your life to have been about? All the things you collect? All the things you've done? Or would you like your life to be all about people? Because that's what's going to last forever. Your relationship with God, your relationship with people. You either live for God or you live apart. And that's why we walk across the room, because we believe that life is about sharing the gospel of Christ's love with all people. People matter to God. Now this morning, in your bulletin, you're going to find a little insert. We were talking about this past week here in the staff. And one of the questions we asked is, how can we begin to reach out